Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Onside. And as you can see today, there's an extra face on the screen, and that's not Bash after the operation. It's a dear friend of ours, George. We talked about at the last show that we're going to do something slightly different. And what we've done is we've got George, who's a mad keen Burnley fan. And what we are going to do today is really have the Burnley perspective. What does George think as a Burnley fan, how they're going to perform? So we'll get to that in a few moments. But firstly, chaps, Ois, my partner as usual. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you. Wednesday evening, we record this, but I'm doing good, thank you.
Okay, George. Welcome, George. Good to see you on our podcast. How are you?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It just sounds so fraud. I mean, I've seen these guys in the morning, during the day, and I'm asking them how they are. So I know exactly how they are. But just this is for the viewers, okay? So as we mentioned, George, it's been a remarkable year or so for Burnley. I mean, from relegation. I mean, always as a Leeds fan, we were in a dogfight a couple of years ago. You went down, we stayed up. I was delighted. You were obviously very disappointed. It's flipped full circle. I'm incredibly depressed. You're incredibly happy. But it was, I would probably say, in terms of the English football, it was probably the story of the year, really, in terms of how remarkable it was. So, as a Burnley fan, how was it? How was the year? What was your expectation at the start of the season? How did it pan out, and how did you feel at the end? Go on, George.
Well, to sum it up shortly, it's been brilliant to watch. Like you said, we went down a couple of years back, and it'd been a long time coming, to be honest. Obviously, we had the highs of somehow getting seventh place under Dash, and then since then it was sort of flirting with relegation, season after season, and you didn't really know where we were going to go from there. So this has served as almost like the Great Reset, which is brilliant for us, and probably have other teams sort of almost admiring what we've done and thinking that relegation might not be that bad now.
I mean, what was it? I mean, you sort of say what you've done. What was I mean, is there a secret ingredient? What was it that Burnley did that maybe could be something that other clubs could emulate? Because in a sense, I mean,
Leeds.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was because it was a risk, really, with Vincent Kompany, unproven, untested. A lot of the old guard went away. He was obviously bringing in players that probably didn't have much experience, if any at all, in the Championship. So to accomplish and achieve what you did, it was absolutely remarkable. So what was the reason for that? I mean, was it just wonderful management? Was it the right players? Because in a sense, it was a risk with the players that you brought in. So what was, as a Burnley fan, what was it that got you over the line? What was it that it was an incredible season? Weren't a record-breaking season, but wasn't far off.
Yeah, not quite. I think firstly, you've got to give praise to the new ownership. Obviously, the first thing they did when they came in, they sacked Sean Dyche, which went down like a lead balloon with the fan base, because everybody always thought that the only way Sean Dyche wasn't going to be Burnley manager was if Sean Dyche left. So yeah, that was a gamble. That went down very badly, and then they came around things like talking about loans that are due for repayment if we go down. People talking as if we're going to be another Sunderland, fall again to League One. But no, he came out, he said, look, we know what we're doing. You need to trust us. We've got Vincent Kompany in who we trust. And it was almost just trust the process, which is hard to hear when you've just gone down. But yeah, it's just time after time again, that Burnley side just proving people wrong.
What was your thoughts on Vincent Kompany? Because he'd, I think he'd done okay was it Anderlecht? Was he managing at Anderlecht? I mean, he'd not pulled up any trees, but I think he'd done okay. So really, I mean, again, what was your thoughts when Vincent Kompany came to?
It was a gamble. It was a gamble, 100%. But I don't think there was anybody better out there. There was some talk around Chris Wilder maybe coming in. I think he was the second favourite to get the job. But a lot of people, including myself, were saying, well, if we're going to get Chris Wilder, then why on earth have we sacked Sean Dyche? Because they're cut from the same cloth. So yeah, like we said, it's all part of this great reset. It was something completely new, but obviously a company fell into Alan Pace's plans, and it's worked magically.
You're absolutely right. I mean, OS, did you have any
Yeah, I was
thoughts
just
on the performance?
I was just going to ask George. You alluded to it there about the, let's call it, the disapproval rate when Sean Dyche was sacked. Were you one of those who was quite sad to see him go? Because when I speak to Burnley fans, or at the time, yes, Burnley unfortunately got labelled with this kind of brush, so to speak, that they play a certain type of football under Sean Dyche. Yes, it's probably enough to keep them up in the Premier League. Then obviously that last season when he was fired, it was looking shaky, let's say. And then obviously I think subsequently what happened. But were you one of those who actually did want to see him go? Were you quite loathed to see him leave?
To be brutally honest, at the time, I was quite annoyed because there was always the thought around it that he would keep us up because he just has that knack, like as we've seen with Everton last season. He just knows how to get teams performing, and still to this day, I do think he probably would have kept us up, but we wouldn't have gone in any direction because next season we might have gone down, or we'd have definitely been scraping survival even if we didn't. So yeah, I don't want to keep saying it, but it's just like a reset, and it's just really refreshing seeing us playing a different style of football, different types of players, and it's just a buzz around Turf Moor that like people haven't really seen in a few years since we got into Europe under Dash.
Talking about this season, then obviously you've had a fantastic season, used to winning. It's going to be probably slightly different this season, but in terms of, I mean, for our viewers who obviously aren't aware of the way that Burnley play, what should the Premier League expect? I mean, what's your expectations as well in terms of where you'll finish? Now, I think you're lucky. This is probably one of the worst Premier Leagues in terms of teams certainly at the bottom. I mean, we're just damn unlucky that we got relegated last season because we'd stay up at a canter. But in terms of what your expectations are, how you think you'll perform, who you think you'll sort of finish above, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's no secret that company he's a Pep disciple. That's how his whole play is based around. You've seen the same with Arteta. You've seen the same with Xavi. He teaches players about football. He doesn't just teach them how to play football. He teaches them what football is all about. And you can really see that he plays with his inverted fullbacks. He moves the ball around. You don't force anything, and your whole play is based around getting the ball to your wingers, getting your fullbacks isolated with your wingers, and then if it doesn't work, then you go around the other side, you try again.
I was just going to ask George just very quickly. I guess one of the concerns for Burnley fans going into this season, I mean, Ayub alluded to it. I know Ayub's right. I mean, there'll be a lot of predictions. I saw the Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher predictions that they both had Sheffield United and Luton Town going down. So ultimately, there's one spot. I think they split their final spot between Wolves and Bournemouth, if memory serves. Now, from your perspective, obviously, Nathan Teller going back to his parent club, Southampton, I believe, and obviously big contributions from him last season, and Taylor Howard-Bellis, who we covered, Ayub, when we did the European Championship segment. He's obviously got a year left on his Man City deal. There was some talk about Fulham and West Ham being in for him. He's probably sixth choice at Manchester City, so there's a decision to be made there. Is that I guess he's not on Burnley's radar, perhaps because of the fact that there's other more established clubs in for him. Maybe it'll cost you a pretty penny, and that's not something that Burnley are willing to go to. But do you worry that in the absence of those two, there could be some challenges given their contributions last year?
Just with the signings that we've made, I can't help but think that if we wanted to get him, we would have got him with how much money we've been spending and the players we've been signing. Like we've signed 3 centre halves already. He was available for, I think it was about £50 million, and so we've spent £7 million on Dara O'Shea from West Brom. Albeit one of the centre halves we signed was Bayer, who was a loan last season with an obligation to buy if we went up. So that's him returning.
Yeah,
but yeah, we've spent close to £80 million this window. So I feel the money's there. It's not like he can't get him because it's £15 million. And the same with Teller. But I think one thing that is striking me is we're not getting bullied into paying what people think their players are worth. We're paying what we think they're worth.
The other aspect that I just wanted to touch on very quickly is, and I think you mentioned it about the manager. He seems to be a manager who, I mean, he's got a clear presence about him. When you watch his interview on the Overlap, I mean, we all know Vincent Kompany because obviously of what he achieved as a player. But if you just listen to the man, he carries himself with a certain presence. I wouldn't call it an arrogance, but there's a certain presence about him. There's a few striking comments that he makes that I always think, he exudes kind of this kind of high standards that he often speaks about. He got the players in to pre-season earlier than anyone's ever been to pre-season, I believe. He spoke on the Overlap really well. He said, "Why would we be celebrating with the 21st best team in the country?" That's how we saw it. And just certain comments. I think he wants to take Burnley forward. Whether or not, I mean, if he has one more successful season at Burnley, it may well be the case that other clubs and other jobs come calling for him. But I think that's where it starts. Vincent Kompany spoke about it from the very start when he came in to Burnley. And I think as much as, and I think Alan Pace, who's the obviously the chairman at Burnley, he speaks about it, him and his partners, ALK Capital, who took over, that it was a very difficult time for them. And I'm kind of keen to watch this documentary that's coming out on Sky Sports, I believe, featuring Mission to Burnley, 4-parter. That should be really interesting. I think it airs this Friday. But Alan Pace talks about how he'd have fans coming up to him shouting all sorts of abuse and what have you. And some of those fans have now changed their tune and have apologized and what have you. But he talks about that kind of the lows and the highs, and he extols the virtues of Vincent Kompany, a manager who wasn't first choice by any stretch. But he's, to your point, to use George's words, he's kind of landed in his lap, so to speak. And I just wonder, I think it's the perfect situation for Burnley in some ways. Yes, they've had the difficulties, but now they've got a very different style of play, a complete turnover of playing staff, a different way of thinking, maybe slightly loftier ambitions. And now with a couple of years of this kind of rejuvenation, maybe they can kick on a little bit. And yes, as you mentioned, maybe it's the perfect first starting year where they are clearly not one of the three worst teams in the league, or at least as I see it. But of course, when you're coming up from the Championship, you've got to prove it. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare. What are your thoughts? Do you think they will be fighting relegation, or do you think they, on the whole, should be okay? Maybe around, I don't know, 13th, 14th, or somewhere.
Really comfortable. I think the word that George kept on using, reset, is absolutely right, because that's what they've done. Because I think if you talked about Burnley maybe a year or so ago, it's turgid, it's not pretty, it's old school football, and it was synonymous with Sean Dyche. I think this year I've got a feeling that it will be as Leeds were in the first season when we got back, everybody's second favourite team. I've got a feeling that maybe that's going to be the case, and I think it will be easier because if you look at the league this year, certainly Sheffield United and Luton are down. I mean, I will be absolutely amazed if those teams are not relegated. And offline we've chatted. Myself and George have chatted, and Wolves. He's talked about Wolves, and you're absolutely right. I think with what's happened as well at Wolves, I think there is some issues at Wolves. I think the team is considerably weakened. They've lost a manager of great reputation and great pedigree. Gary O'Neill, always his favourite manager, is at the helm. And I was absolutely adamant that the decision Bournemouth made was right. So I am pretty confident that it will be vindicated, that Wolves will go down with Gary O'Neill. So I think there's maybe 4 or 5 teams that Burnley are better than. And I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm actually really, really looking forward to the curtain raiser to the Premier League on Friday. I'm excited. Burnley will get absolutely battered. There is no question. But
I don't think that's the question, is it?
But I'm looking forward to it. I'm just looking forward to Burnley playing a brand of football that's going to be exciting, pleasing to the eye, very un-Burnley-like to fans like me who obviously have seen Burnley for the last 10 years under Dyche. So what's your predictions and thoughts for Friday? It's going to get ugly, George, but are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's just good to have football back, as everybody's been saying. You don't realize how long the break is, but I kind of draw positives from last season because we faced City in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup last season. Don't get me wrong, we got absolutely battered at their place.
You
We
did,
lost 6-0.
6-0, yeah.
You were lucky to get
but,
nil.
But yeah, but for the first half an hour, me and everyone around me in the away end, we were just like we're going pound for pound with we're trading punches with Manchester City here, and we were just happy to watch it us still playing our brand of football and not folding and packing 6-7 men behind the ball and just trying to get to the 90 minutes. And we actually did play good football in places. Yeah. So I'm hoping now with home advantage, with new players in, that we can at least get a bit further on. Maybe try and stretch the game more towards not being 6-0 and get some form of momentum from that game going forward.
Yeah. Do you reckon company, just a quick one, Oris, before you go, Bielsa ultimately, he espoused one way of playing football, and he was asked the question once, if plan A is not working, what do? He says, just try harder at plan A. Is that similar to Vincent Kompany? Has he a way of playing and he will stick to his principles, or will he adapt depending on the game situation?
I think adapting sort of has two meanings, because I feel like I'm a firm believer, if you're adapting before the game's even started, then you've already halfway lost. But if you realise that if plan A is not working mid-game, I have absolutely no problem with going to a plan B in game, because if they're absolutely peppering you down the left-hand side, yeah, by all means shift players over. But
is that the way that Vincent Kompany operates? Is he somebody that's quite happy to tweak mid-game?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Constantly tweaking. He's constantly, like, even after, I think it was about 10 minutes in the Man City game, the ball went out for a throw-in and someone went down injured. He called all the players over for a rejig because he saw something they didn't like, and he sent them back out with fresh tactics, and it started working again.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think just on that, it's interesting because, George, you mentioned the FA Cup game last year, the 6-0 defeat, and I think there was a part of Kompany in that game in terms of the way he prepared the team, whether it's just in terms of the style or what have you, which is what, look, most likely we're going to be playing. But by that time, promotion looked pretty secure, let's say, or relatively secure. And I think there was something about perhaps sending a message to his team to say, look, this is the kind of opposition. Obviously, you're not going to be playing Manchester City every week, and that was during the run when they were slapping everyone in Europe as well as domestically. So you pretty caught them at a wrong time, Haaland hat-trick and what have you. But it was just, I think there's a part of that message to send to your team to say, look, I believe in you, the way we're playing, and we're going to go into the backyard of the best team in Europe, and we're going to play a certain way. So I think there is some sort of psychological impression that you try and put onto your team that, to your point, George, we're not just going to put 6 or 7 men behind the ball and just see if we can keep it 0-0 for as long as possible. And there is something, I mean, I understand, just slightly off topic, Ayub, I understand why you like the move that Bournemouth made. I don't want to get too far off topic. I understand why you like it. I don't think you could judge it right now, but I can understand why, because it happened under Stoke, right? Stoke City, they didn't necessarily develop their playing style. They played a certain way. We knew how they'd play, and fine, plan A was pretty effective for them until it wasn't, because they didn't really develop anything from a playing style or what have you. And Burnley maybe perhaps were going down the same road under Sean Dyche. I remember watching many games. George will have watched hundreds and hundreds, but I remember watching many televised games of Burnley thinking, fine, it's back to front, bypassing the midfield a lot of first-time balls from Westwood and others and what have you. But it was one way of playing, and it worked, because remember, the majority of the teams in the Premier League are middling to average teams, which means if you can affect your plan A in a good way, you've got a good chance of winning. You're not playing, now you might argue it's a little bit more competitive. You've got probably a slightly higher shift at the top end with Brighton, with Aston Villa, and with other clubs, Newcastle, developing. But it'll be interesting just to see how they fare. And Ayub, to your point, whether Kompany at some point compromises his principles. I don't believe he will, because I think he's got equity and he'll keep playing. And I think he's got that little bit of buffer knowing that they are a better team than Luton and Sheffield United. I think that much cannot be disputed. And then it's a case of you've got a few other Premier League clubs in a bit of disarray: Everton, Bournemouth, Wolves, question marks around one or two others. So very interesting to see how they fare. But I'd be surprised if they are one of the three favourites to go down. I've not checked the bookies recently. Ayub, you may have.
Come on, George. We'll sort of wrap up this piece. But before we wrap up, bearing in mind, we're based in Blackburn. A lot of our subscribers are Blackburn fans. So it's not going to go down well. But in terms of prediction, you must be pretty confident you're going to stay up. So where do you think you're going to finish?
Let me take my optimistic hat off for a second and be a bit of more of a realist. I'm going to go 15th. Like we said, I think there's 100% there's three worse teams than us. And for the record, I'm in the Luton, Sheffield United and Wolves camp. As much as I
and who else? There's obviously, if you're 15th, there
yeah,
is there
I
one
think...
is there there's another team there?
Two.
Okay.
Math was never my strong point.
Many subjects were not your strong point.
It's true.
The
problem. To be fair, I've got a list in front of me, and just general reasons why I think that we could be better than them. So you've got Bournemouth, you've got an unknown manager, could go either way. Could finish top half, could finish rock bottom. You don't know. You've got Everton. All it takes is for DCL to get injured first game, and they're going to be right down there. You've got Notts Forest. Can't see them making the signings to kick on from what they got last season.
Yeah.
Wolves, I think Wolves are in trouble. Don't have the squad depth for the Premier League. They don't have a striker. Lost too many. Not got the money to bring in other people, which is probably why Lopetegui left. And an interesting one as well. But I think Palace. Elise is injured, which could be long term, not sure yet. Not replaced Zaha yet. They've not got a lot of money to spend. It's an aging squad. I know that Roy can get a tune out of them, but they could easily be down there.
Yeah, I think the Palace one is an interesting one. I think that's an interesting shout. I think Roy just has such a reputation, and especially his history with that club, that many feel, he obviously did a really good job there at the back end last season. And even Palace would probably think along the lines of what Burnley fans will be thinking, right? Which is that there's definitely three worse teams than us, irrespective of our individual challenges. I think where Palace sometimes struggle is in the final third. And to your point, George, when you're missing, last season when they had especially Eze and Elise really coming to the fore, second half at Ellen Road springs to mind. But to your point, if you're missing some of that and Zaha's moved on to Turkey, you're right, there could be some question marks there. But Luton and Sheffield United will be strong favourites to go down. There's no getting away from that.
All right, okay. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the teams that you've mentioned, again, it sort of goes back to the point I was sort of saying that it seems to be an incredibly weak league. When last year, when we were in the league, it was probably one of the most competitive Premier Leagues. And I'm not just saying that because we got relegated. I genuinely sort of think that it's just a stroke of luck for Burnley to be up this season, because not only are the two other teams that were promoted weak, but I think the other teams that you've mentioned are weaker as well. So I certainly think you're probably right. I've got a feeling that maybe it might be slightly higher than that. Seriously, I think Vincent Kompany is a top quality manager, and I just sort of think that he's got Burnley playing, and I certainly will be interested to see how they play. And I'm looking forward to the brand of football as well. So as a Burnley fan, you are, George. I think you have got every right to be quite happy. And I'm hoping that we join you next season, which at the moment doesn't seem likely, but you never know. You never know.
I like your reasoning, Ayub, about how Burnley's just got good timing to get promoted this season.
I think it is. I think it really is. We are cursed. We are absolutely cursed.
Yeah, but next year when Leeds get promoted, there'll be a few other clubs thinking, "Oh, we were lucky this year because we got Leeds." So that's one spot already secure. But okay.
But I I wish you, George and Burnley, the absolute best of luck, because really, I mean, as I said, I know there's rivalries, but I was born in Preston, so I don't share the animosity that Blackburn-born people have. It's a little bit
Yeah, and
sort of
I think there's a little bit there's a nice storyline, at least for neutral football observers or football anoraks, that you've got an absolute Premier League icon that's manager. Clearly, he's got a lot about him. I just find it an interesting story. He's obviously settled in the Northwest. His partner's from the Northwest. It's just, yeah, there's just something to follow there. It's just interesting, even for the neutral. Even as an Arsenal fan, you like, Burnley. I like listening to Vincent Kompany speak, my second greatest centre back in the history of the Premier League. But yeah, just I find it. I just find it fascinating. So it'd be good to follow. Absolutely.
Excellent. We're all Burnley. Right. Thanks for that, George, and thanks as always, Ois. Right. Our second topic, and I'm going to let Ois lead on this. We've got many Liverpool fans. But it's been an interesting time for Liverpool. They've bought quite early, and it looked as if that was the beginning of a real drive by Liverpool to ensure that they're equipped to really challenge. But it seems to have just fallen off a little bit. They've not really consolidated on the early signings. So, OS, there's been a lot of talk about Liverpool. Some fans are happy, some fans are not happy, and because of the lack of activity. So, what's your thoughts on Liverpool and where they're at this moment in time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, I'd say the majority of the fans right now are quite unhappy. I don't think there's many kind of shouting from the rooftops about what Liverpool are going to do next season, even though I think there is some cause for optimism. I think what Liverpool, ever since they've brought Jurgen Klopp to the club, or Jurgen Klopp chose Liverpool, whichever way you want to look at it, but since October 2015, the journey they've been on, you knew they had a special manager. Clearly, they had obviously one of the most iconic football clubs in the world. And it was just a matter of time, at least I thought, that they would soon be competing at the highest level. And you saw that. And Jurgen Klopp originally is a kind of owner's dream to some extent. He's not high maintenance in terms of making a lot of negative statements in the press about wanting more finances like certain other managers might be. So when it comes to the ownership structure that they have there under FSG, he's the perfect manager. He's a kind of an Arsene Wenger 2.0 in the sense of he'll work with what you give him. He'll operate in that kind of second market, maybe even third market in terms of recruitment of players. Obviously, his reign at Liverpool will be synonymous with, kind of that front three of Firmino, Mane, and Salah, and they were all bought for the best part of 95, 100 million in total. So it goes to show that when you have a manager who can work wonders with, I wouldn't say much, but clearly their net spend wasn't great. It's not in amongst some of the absolute big boys. What can happen over time is that the owners tend to, I wouldn't say take advantage, but they become comfortable. It's maybe a similar story to what you're seeing at the bottom end of the table, maybe perhaps with Wolves, where Premier League clubs and owners are thinking, well, there's 2 dead certs going down anyway. Why am I going to spend 100 million plus 100 million wage bill or whatever it may be when I know I only need to find one more team that needs to get relegated and I survive into the Premier League? So what I mean is it just kind of, it sometimes tempers ambition to some extent when you have a manager who can work miracles to some extent. Now, if I look at last season, clearly they've had a down year, 22 points behind the eventual winners, Manchester City. They never competed for the title, which they've done obviously the year before when they came 1 game away from winning the Champions League, 12, 13 minutes from winning the Premier League and the quadruple, which would have been unbelievable. And then the season after they fall away, and there could be a number of reasons for that, which I'll get into this in the second stanza once you've given your thoughts. But just this season alone, when you look at the transfer activity, it is quite glaring what they've done. If you look at all the players that have left this season, Henderson, I'll mention just some of the first team squad players: Jordan Henderson, Fabinho, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita, Firmino, James Milner, just Fabio Carvalho to some extent. They've trimmed, and some of those players were expiring anyway, but they've trimmed 52 million off their salary, off their books. The two players they've bought in, Dominic Szoboszlai and Alexis McAllister, that's 14 million in salary. So that's a benefit. So that's a 38 million kind of cheaper salary, let's say, on your books for this season. Now let's look at the transfer fees. They've brought in 53 million, mainly through the sales of Fabinho and Henderson, raising 52 million of that 53, and they've spent 95 million. So that's a net spend of 42. So they've trimmed 38 million off the wage structure, and they've spent 42 million. So in a year, that's nothing. That's just a net spend of zero, essentially. And obviously they'll have the salary benefits moving forward. So that's what a lot of Liverpool fans are complaining about, which is that we saw what the issues were last season. Clearly, the number one issue was the lack of energy and the inability to play that pressing style because the midfielders couldn't get around the pitch to support the front men, covering Trent Alexander-Arnold as he normally tends to fire forward and what have you. So, and then they were caught unawares, I believe, by the Jordan Henderson sale. Jurgen Klopp has alluded to as much in his comments that wasn't something that they were planning. And that makes sense. You don't go from being a first team player, captain, to then all of a sudden being carted out of the club. I think it was too good an offer for him to refuse. So they were slightly caught lacking there, and now they've had to rejig their entire midfield. So they've lost Fabinho, lost Henderson. Thiago, unfortunately, is never healthy. Lost Milner, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. He's had his health concerns, and now there's talk of Lavia. I agree. I think they'll get that over the line, perhaps, and I think Southampton will probably end up getting their 50 million. But I think what Liverpool fans are disgruntled with is that you've got this world-class manager who's clearly got the equity for the owners to back him. But what I've found all too often, when you have a manager who's elite and at the highest level, owners tend to operate the other way, which is that we've got someone who can work miracles. He can turn us from a middling club to a competing club, and that's enough for us. And I will cover some of the ownership structure in my second stanza, but I think that's where a lot of Liverpool fans are disgruntled about the fact that they are not taking full advantage as Jurgen Klopp probably approaches his last part of his tenure, let's say, at Liverpool Football Club, that we're not giving this manager, a manager who they'll not replace. I would be very surprised. I mean, even future managers, they probably will never have it as good as they've got under Jurgen Klopp, that they don't give him all the tools necessary to compete at the highest level. And just one final point, when you see clubs like Arsenal spending 105 million, it's not all about spending money. You've spoken about this many times, but when you see clubs showing big ambition, Declan Rice 105 million, United spending big on a novice striker, but you see everywhere, even Newcastle with Sandro Tonali, City obviously just bought a central defender for 77 million. What they're thinking is we're going to be left behind here because competition is as fierce as ever, especially with the development of clubs like Newcastle, maybe even Brighton, Villa, Chelsea will have some upturn, you would think. So I think that's a lot of the fans' frustration, that the owners are not giving Jurgen Klopp the tools to compete. And I think there's a great deal of truth in that as well.
What's your thoughts, George? I know you're not obviously a Liverpool fan, but I know you follow football. So what's your thoughts on Liverpool? Have they strengthened adequately? Do they need a lot more players? Or do you agree with what a lot of the Liverpool fans are saying, that the owners are just not supporting the club enough to compete?
I think they need a lot more. It should be a gradual process. It's almost like they've ground to a halt. They've sold everything all in one go, and now they're restarting from scratch. And I feel like they're going to get caught out. Whereas in reality, it should have been signing someone like Lavia last season, give him a season under someone like Fabinho or Henderson, and then you slowly integrate them in, almost like what they were trying to do with Bajcetic last season, because he looked good, but you can't have two 19, 20-year-old lads at the base of your midfield. And I know the argument's there that Trent maybe can play midfield, but still it's not good enough, because for me, Trent isn't good enough defensively to play in midfield alongside McAllister and Szoboszlai. So, yeah, a lot of work to be done, I think.
I mean, mine's slightly different. I mean, I still think you're right. I mean, I agree with both of you and the Liverpool fans that I think they probably still need 2 or 3 more players. But in terms of what they have, the midfield is certainly improved exponentially. I think it's what they had before. I mean, OS, you talked about the lack of legs. Absolutely, it was the old pensioners. It was Chelsea pensioners show, really, with their midfield. So I think all the players on the whole they've got rid of, they've done a great job. I think they needed to offload those players. I think even Henderson, to me, Henderson he stayed at Liverpool, or at least Liverpool have kept him 2 years too long. Fabinho as well. Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, I mean, he should have gone 2 years ago, really. Fabinho, I think for some reason he'd just fallen off the standards that he'd set. Firmino, probably of all the players, is one that I would have liked to have seen, if I was a Liverpool fan, still stay at the club. But in saying that, I mean, if you look at, there's an embarrassment of riches, certainly offensively. In terms of the midfield as well, Curtis Jones, the key is, if I'm a Liverpool fan, it's fingers crossed that he stays fit, because he's an exceptional young player, exceptional young talent. But in terms of the attacking array of riches that they have, they've got obviously Mo Salah, Luis Diaz, who I think is exceptional. He was unfortunate, he got injured. Darwin Núñez, they always say the second season of Núñez will be exceptional. I'm looking forward to watching Núñez. Jota is a 7, 8 out of 10 every single time. He's a solid pro. So I think in terms of the midfield now, I think it's much improved. In terms of the attack, I think it's as good as any. I'd probably go as far as saying in world football. Seriously, if you include all of the attacking options that they have. Defense, Van Dijk, who's one of the best defenders in the league. Trent Arnold, who is an exceptional, quite a versatile player as well. Robertson, pretty solid. Konate, I'd hope he's now at a point where he feels established. He understands the league. That is an exceptional side already. You add maybe 2 or 3. That's a title-winning side. So I, as a Liverpool fan, probably won't be as disheartened as some of the fans. And I think they should be quite delighted, because it's a much better side this year than they were last year. So,
yeah.
And with Klopp, just on the point of Klopp now is one of those coaches where he is in control. At Liverpool Football Club, he's not a manager who's at the behest of the owners. He's in a position where he can, I won't say dictate, but certainly say, well, look, this is what I want. If you don't give this to me, I'll walk. He should be in that position. So for me, if he stays, he's satisfied. If he's not happy, he should say something. So the fact he's not probably saying, I mean, unless I've missed his comments, but what's his comments?
Well, I just don't think that's consistent with the person that he is, or consistent with his brand. He's not going to come out as manager of Liverpool Football Club. He understands what Liverpool Football Club is as an institution, and he's not your Rafa Benitez, who's, who'll get into an argument in an empty room. He's somebody who's he's quite respectful of the Liverpool traditions. Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool is a perfect marriage when you think about what Liverpool represents and what he means, especially when, in terms of coming from Dortmund, similar in terms of fan base, is that type of kind of club and what have you. The worry from a Liverpool perspective, I think, is just more some of the off the field stuff, and that's why I spoke about a little bit more in the first point. If you look at their sporting director, Michael Edwards was given a lot of plaudits for a lot of the work that he'd done with Klopp. He left in 2022. They then replaced him with Julian Ward, who was working under him. He left after a year at the end of this last season. They've then hired this gentleman from Germany called Jörg Schmadtke. They give him a 3-month contract. It actually ends at the end of this transfer window. So what that's already telling me, there's a lot of upheaval in the back. And just if you follow a little bit about American sports, so you, as you know, I do. There's a lot of talk about the American journalists right now, because obviously FSG, owners of Boston Red Sox, an iconic baseball club, an institution. They've won 9 World Series titles. Now, if you follow a lot of the local media and local journalists, they talk about the fact that they've essentially turned the Boston Red Sox into underdogs. And you're talking like they're like a franchise like the Lakers or Real Madrid. These kind of, they transcend sport, and they've had opportunities in terms of spending more on their wage structure, on their bill, on their whole kind of salary structure and what have you. And they're just happy just to be middling. Even at the recent trade deadline, they had an opportunity to sell, to buy, to upgrade the roster. They just stood pat. They lost one of the most iconic baseball players recently, Mookie Betts, a few years ago. that would be the worry for me if I was Liverpool, because Liverpool is also a major club and sporting institution. And if you're owned by an ownership group where earlier this year, if you remember, there were some rumours that the club was up for sale, then John Henry came out and said we're not for sale. They're not showing the signs of a club that's really going all out there to win. Now, they may still achieve that, to your point, because the player personnel is still half decent, the coach is elite. But I always think, and I compare it to Arsenal, if you remember last year, we spoke often that before winning comes competing, and before competing comes wanting to compete. And that would be the question mark from a Liverpool perspective, is that are we actually trying to compete with the big boys, especially when the competition at the top end of the table is stiffening? So I think those question marks have to be answered by the ownership group, because right now their actions speak louder than their words. And I mean, Moses Caicedo is clearly there on a plate. And I'm not saying, again, it's all about buying players. But why can they not just go to Brighton and say 100 million? Yeah, it's a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But imagine now Caicedo in that team with that front, and him covering Trent Alexander-Arnold with his energy and what have you. You saw his statistics last season. That would be a title challenging team. I'm not saying they can't without him, but that's the kind of ambition you want to show to your fans, to say, yes, we see the need and we've addressed it. And George is absolutely right. You ideally want to do things in stages and increments. They've not done that. They've grinded to a halt, to use your words. But that would be the big worry for me as a Liverpool fan. And I don't think there's any getting away from that. I do think the club's probably up for sale. I'm not sure when it'll happen or how it'll happen, but it does feel like the end of an era to some extent. And you just hope that Klopp's not awoke before then, because then it could all get a little messy.
All right, just on a to sort of wrap up. I mean, I think, OS, you think the Lavia deal it's as good as done, but I suppose Southampton probably just trying to stretch it as far as they can do to get the maximum. So do you think he will definitely be a Liverpool player?
I think so, because similar to the Bayern Munich Tottenham Hotspur situation with Harry Kane, I feel like if clubs are talking and bids are going in left and right, whether it's the third bid, fourth bid, or the seventh bid, that just tells me there's a deal to be made, clearly. Otherwise, you'd have just stopped after a few bids, realizing there's no business to be done here. I just think George hit the nail on the head. I think Southampton know they'll probably get their 50 million. And that's why when a lot of people were saying, oh, Declan Rice, 105 million, I'm like, if it doesn't compromise any of your other transfer targets, and you believe that he's a man that could potentially deliver you the title, who cares if it's 105 million? That's the way I see it. So if they believe Lavia could be the missing piece, he obviously played a full season, although he missed some games for Southampton last year. He's got some Premiership experience. If you believe that guy could be the missing piece of your puzzle, and they clearly need some defensive base at the pivot, because Szoboszlai and Alexis McAllister's a quintessential 8. Szoboszlai is quite attacking, so there's a certain chemistry that could build there nicely, but they need a solid technical defensive midfielder, and Lavia could be that player. So I think it gets done, yes. Probably mainly down to kind of fans unrest. I think they'll be like, we better get this deal over the line. That's what I think.
I think personally, I just think that part of the frustration, or the main bulk of the frustration, is obviously it's no secret that they value him at £50 million. So why are you creeping up in 2, 3, 4 million pound stages when after 4 or 5 times they've still turned around and said he's worth £50 million? Just pay it and move on to somebody else, because you don't just need him. You still need 1 or 2 more players. So stop wasting all your time and resources on him. Just pay the money and move on.
Yeah. I agree. Absolutely agree. I think sometimes you need to know who you're dealing with. And I think with Southampton, it's absolutely clear they're in no desperate state. So they're not going to be in a position where they're just. I mean, if it was Leeds with Victor Orta, it would be a different story. We'd sell him for 15 million. But you're absolutely right. It was Southampton weren't going to budge. So really, it's maybe, I suppose they're still thinking, well, look, the season hasn't started. It's not something where if we don't have him for the first game of the season, it's going to be catastrophic. So maybe, but you're right. What for a club of that magnitude is 4 million, 5 million, 6 million? It's peanuts when you're considering the amounts of money that they are going to spend. But
and just one final point to that. I mean, Southampton put him on the bench for the first game of the season. I think they racked up a record 990 odd passes in that first game. I think they played Sheffield Wednesday, but they had him on the bench, Lavia, in that first game. He wasn't, I think, in the squad in the Carabao Cup game. I believe I read that somewhere. So this is my point. I think there's a deal there to be had and get over the line. To your, I mean, the only point I would disagree with Ayub is what Liverpool fans are arguing is, yes, but get him in the club, get him in pre-season, it's a whole new look midfield. So earlier the better. They start playing with one another. I think it was just the other day when Szoboszlai and McAllister played together for the first time, and your first game is away at Stamford Bridge. So in a league that's going to be quite fierce, quite tightly contested, you would think, I don't think there's any games you can just say, oh, we've got an easy start to the season, so let's just take a few liberties in the transfer window. I think when you're starting at Stamford Bridge, you'd like to have your best team out there and not be looking to do any major dealings kind of in those last few weeks of the transfer window. So that's the only point I think where they've missed the trick. Again, and I think if they lose at Stamford Bridge, I think that negativity only gets louder.
Yeah, absolutely right. Right. Well, there we have it. That's our views on on Burnley and Liverpool's transfer dealings. If I was a Liverpool fan, I'd be a little bit more optimistic. Obviously, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but I think that's just Liverpool fans. That's their DNA. All right, so we'll call it a day, chaps. I'll do the usual first. I'll ask if you can kindly smash a like, subscribe if you haven't. Hit the notification bell because it will tell you when our videos are dropping. And now, as the season has started, we'll be posting quite regularly. Okay, so and on that note, George, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Absolutely,
thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and obviously it's something that was controversial as a Burnley fan to have on a show with predominantly Blackburn fans, but that's the way we roll. Bring it on. All right, so. Fans, I mean, I know there's lots of Liverpool fans, so please put your comments in the box. We'd like to read them. And obviously, every comment that is made, we'll respond to them. If they're aggressive, we'll be aggressive. If they're gentle, we'll still be aggressive. Okay, because the season's starting almost. Yeah. All right, so and on that note, I'm trying to think of the line that we should be using, or I should be using. It's "Don't stray offside." No, it isn't, is it?
Don't stray off.
Don't stray off. I'll get it there. In fact, hopefully on Friday we could have Badge back, so he'll remember the line. So as always, thank you so much for your support. And until the next time, we'll see you soon.